You have a couple of options for stuffing pincushions, such as the one I was making by machine in a previous video. And I'm just going to cover pincushions like these where you've sewn it by machine because you have different options for something where you're finishing the edges by hand. So the first one, this is something you could use for either style of pincushion, is you can use a stuffing such as this wool stuffing. I purchased this from a doll making supply store on Etsy. You could also use polyfill. I like this for a variety of purposes, so I have the wool. And one of the things you want to keep in mind is that you don't want to just shove a big clump of it in. And this is one where I've already prepared this. I've got it, the edges turned and all neat the way I want it. So take small pieces, especially when you're starting in the corners. And if you've got a pincushion where your fingers can reach down in the corners, great. I'm going to just do each of the corners, the far ones and the ones that are close to me. But if you have a bigger pincushion and you need to, if you've got something like this tool for stuffing dolls, you can use that. Most people don't have that. You can use a chopstick. Just anything that will get the little pieces into the corners. And so you can just take them and stuff them like that. I find it easier just to get something into the corners first so that you won't have this big bunch in the center and then trying to finesse it and, push the chopstick in. So you can put little pieces in there and see I'm just pushing it into place down there. So then I get the whole bottom edge of it and I start working my way up and then I stitch it together. And I'll show at the end how to stitch them together. And it depends on how fluffy you want this to be. You'll have a fair amount of loft and a pretty fluffy, puffy pincushion if you use just one of this or a polyfill stuffing, which some people like, and some people want something that's not quite as light. Maybe you've got a cat that's always knocking your stuff off your sewing table, and you want something that has just a little bit more of a heft to it. We like to take these poly pellets. You can get these at Joann Fabrics and a lot of craft stores. They're just a little synthetic pellet that I find the easiest way to get them in is to take this tablespoon and just put them in through the opening. And notice I'm just going to have these on the bottom of it. It's not that it's going to ruin your pins to have it, but I'd rather have my pins sticking into the polyfill and then have some of this. I'm really just adding these for weight. I never stuff the entire pincushion with these. These are for making like teddy bears and things like that. So you can see I'm putting it in between this wool stuffing and the bottom of the pincushion. So I would keep filling that up. And, I just do this by feel. I'm not measuring it. I usually take it in my hand and think, no, that's not hefty enough. I want to put some more in. And here's a pro tip. Notice I've got this inside kind of a little bowl because this is messy. I've already got these all over the place. And then when I'm finished, when I think, okay, that's enough of those, I can stuff some more of my polyfill or wool stuffing in across the top and be ready to sew that one up. Now, another option that I really love is walnut shells. Now, these you can only use on something where you really have the edges well sealed up. You don't want to do this with something where you've just hand blanket stitched the edging, because that just leaves little holes that the walnut shells can come through. And this is where I really encourage you to be super careful. I have a mat that I can pick up. I mean, you can use a piece of wax paper or something. And then I've got this little tray over it. This tray has something where it's got a little spout in the end. So when I'm finished spilling the stuff all over this tray, I can just pick it up and pour it back. And one time I wasn't paying attention, didn't have a mat down, and I spilled these walnut shells all inside my sewing machine. And it's really hard to get that out of the feed dogs. My sister thought that was really hilarious, especially when I did it twice. She's still laughing about it. So some people use a funnel, but again, I just really prefer to use this tablespoon. I've tried the funnels, and I just find that it just gives me one more thing to have to manage. You're going to need quite a few of these to go in here. Now, sometimes I like to take some of the polyfill or the wool stuffing first and put that, a little bit of that into the corners and along here, and then put the walnut shells in. They will go down and fill these corners quite nicely, but it just depends on what kind of a look you like. And so you can see from here, you just have to keep filling this up. Now, eventually we're going to get to the top of this, and you're going to have room for these edges to fold toward each other, and then you're going to have to hand sew these together. I really don't like the look of, getting these mostly filled and then machine stitching. I think it's, that's fine if you're buying a bean bag or something that you got at Target, but you don't want to do that for something, that's going to be a nice decorative item. You want it to be tidy and not to see a line of machine stitching out there. And there's nothing wrong with buying bean bags, but that's not what we're making. Now, this is one that I have filled with the walnut shells, and then to make it a little bit easier to handle this all when I'm getting up to the top closure, this is where I take a little layer of my regular stuffing, and I put that sort of right inside the opening so that I won't be having a battle with these walnut shells as I'm trying to sew it. It's just really too many things to try to keep track of. And we're trying to make this look neat, but also keep from losing our minds with it. Now I'm going to keep this on my little tray as I'm pinning this together, because it's really easy just to, I've been scarred by that experience of pouring walnut shells I have them all over the floor. It's just a nightmare. Okay, but they're great. So what I'm doing is I had a 1/4 inch seam, and so I'm just by hand folding this side under about 1/4 inch. I happen to be I'm working from what's the bottom of the pincushion. I find it works a little bit better if I pin the bottom to the top and sew it that way. And see, here's where the 1/4 inch line would be against the top. So now that I've got the bottom folded, this is a little awkward, but I'm going to pin that to the top. And so you can see that's approximately going to be how the pincushion is going to look when I'm finished. So now we have to get it sewn together. And this is where you just need to do a really tidy invisible whip stitch. This is the hardest part of the whole process. I've got a size 9mm needle and just a regular 50 weight thread. I think it's a cotton thread in this case. And I've made a good knot on the end of the thread. I'm coming up, see how I'm peeling this back, and I'm coming up inside this fold. And this is another reason why you don't want to have this pressed with an iron. You want to have some little flexibility. See, there's the tail of that thread. I'm just poking that under there. Now I have it where I want it, and I can just start, you have to kind of woman handle this. Now I can start whip stitching it with tiny little stitches. So my needle is going, here's where my thread came up on this bottom side. Now I'm going into the top side. So I'm just taking a little tiny bite and kind of make a little diagonal stitch going back to the bottom. And now I just do another one again, just taking a small bite and coming out on the diagonal that way again. And just keep going like so. If I get down to the very end and I think, I really need a little bit more stuffing, this isn't, sometimes it settles while you're working on it. You think, well, that's that. I have not achieved perfection. I want to put a little bit more stuffing in. I usually wait until I have, just an inch or less that I still have to do. That's when I can see, do I have it filled the way I want it to be filled? And at that point, I can take a little bit of this stuffing and poke a little bit more stuffing in there. And when you get to the very end of this, I'm not going to make you watch me sew the whole thing, but let's say this was the end and I'd closed it up. I'm ready to finish it off. I'm taking my last stitch. I then can just turn around and come back like this and do some little, like go backwards into the fold of the pincushion, maybe do another tiny little stitch where I'm going backwards and coming out again into the fold. And so then I've buried that thread and I can clip it all off, and I'm going to have a nice tidy little pincushion that looks like this. You don't really, you can't even notice where you've sewn it together by the time you're finished with this. And we have another video where you can watch the kind of blanket stitch edging that you need to put something together by hand. But we do have a number of machine-made pincushions, and I really enjoy making those. So this is how you stuff them and finish them.